I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things to do with our daughters around Christmas time is to set up the nativity scene. Claire tells the story as we pull out each piece, starting with Mary and then the angel that tells Mary about Jesus, and all the way through to where the Magi who come to worship baby Jesus. Those of you who are Christmas time purists, you might have the three Magi, or you don't know how many kings, across the living room because they weren't at the stable there in Luke chapter 2. It's true, yeah. Well, they tell the story from one bit to the other. Rachel and I were given a beautiful nativity scene by my aunt several Christmas, I think it was 6 Christmases. She gave us one piece at a time, and we've loved it. It's been a beautiful addition to our Christmas decorations. The girls know that they're not supposed to play with those, but they will every now and then, you know, they're playing with their own plastic nativity set over there on the side. Those characters inevitably make the long journey over to Bethlehem too, and there in the same fields there were Fisher-Price little people worshiping over, keeping watch over their flock by night, different things like that. But if you take out any set, you are pretty much going to find pretty much the same thing, the same characters. Got to have Jesus. It's a nativity scene. Mary and Joseph, shepherds, wise men, an angel, a few animals, sometimes sheep, camels, and a donkey. Well, if you look at modern day depictions of Christ's birth, you're always going to see Mary sitting on a donkey and Joseph traveling with her on that 100-mile plus from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That donkey has become famous in our Christmas crazed culture at times, with the whole story seen through that donkey's eyes. He's even named in some cultures. But the truth of the matter is that we don't even know that Mary had a donkey to sit on as she, very pregnant, made her way to Bethlehem to be taxed with her husband Joseph. There's another animal that plays a part in the Christmas story, and we read about him her just a little bit. Even though she comes on the scene 1,400 years earlier, maybe even a little more, she comes on the scene a lot earlier than this Christmas story. The children of Israel at this point, they're still making their way to the promised land. They've left Egypt from the book of Exodus. They've forsaken Pharaoh and they're clinging to Canaan. I think you'll see that the story isn't really about this donkey, although we make it much about her for some reason. It's not even about the petty prophet that was on her, Balaam. It's not about a cowardly king Balak who bribed Balaam so that he would curse the Jews. It is all about the extraordinary measures that God takes to protect and preserve his people so that his promise of a coming Messiah might be made good on. That's what this story is all about. Don't think for a second that the Christmas story just happened. Christ's birth in Bethlehem was the result of all history. I mean, we divide history by, BC and AD today. That was the whole pinnacle of history coming to that moment. It's the result of all history working up to that point. Dozens of prophecies, thousands, if not millions of individuals all playing their role. From Adam and Eve to Esther and Haman, God's purpose was to give his only begotten Son so that whoever believes on him will have everlasting life. It didn't just happen. It wasn't an accident that there was a census and a really scared young girl and a husband, and they just happened upon a stable one night, and there the Messiah comes. It's a story that was developing for years. I'm going to be summarizing the passage that we're going to be in Numbers 22 through 24, but you can follow along with me by picking up in that first, Numbers 22, verse 1. It says, "Then the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And Moab was exceeding afraid of the people because they were many. And Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel." So again, the children of Israel have left Egypt. They're traveling to Canaan. Moab is a country near them, and they're scared that Israel's going to come in and wipe them out. Skip down to verse 5. They're scared. Then he, Balak, the king of the Moabites, sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, "Look, A people has come out from Egypt. See, they cover the face of the earth and are settling next to me. Therefore, please come at once, in verse 6, curse this people for me, for they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. We're introduced to Balaam, a prophet, a seer, a diviner, a soothsayer. He's all called those different things all throughout Scripture. And I'll be honest, I'm a little confused by this character of Balaam. Every ancient text that we have says of Balaam or describes him as a non-Jew, a Gentile, with great power, and every other reference of him in Scripture describes him as a very evil man. Yet in this passage, in Numbers 22 through 24, he seems to have some kind of relationship with Jehovah God. He's on some kind of speaking terms with him. Well, Balak, the king of the Moabites, you can remember that way, Balak, king, and Balaam, the prophet, he tries to pay Balaam off to curse the Jews who are surrounding Moab at this time. Well, the story goes that Balaam welcomes Balak's entourage into his house, and he tells him to stay the night while he asks God what he should do. Lord, should I curse your people? Is kind of how that prayer goes. Whoever Balaam is, he knows he's not supposed to curse God's people, but he entertains the thought because it's a pretty good business proposition. Let's be honest. A king is offering all this just for one small curse. Well, that evening when Balaam asks God, can I curse them? Verse 12 of Numbers 22 says, God says to him, you shall not go with them, you shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. And Balaam sends off King Balak's entourage, refusing to go against God. Well, King Balak is distraught, and this was his last line of defense, this curse from Balaam. His people will not stand a chance against Israel, so he sends Balaam more gifts, and he's presented with those gifts by people of more power. He calls them princes of Moab. And he asks Balaam a second time to curse Israel. In verse 18, Balaam answers and says, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more. Now therefore, please, you also stay here tonight that I may know what the Lord will say to me. He says, I couldn't curse God's people. Why don't y'all stay the night? I'll ask him again, right? I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. Let me give you my assessment of Balaam. He's a guy that has all the right words, but he is just a cheap, two-bit charlatan trying to make a buck. He says good stuff about God. If Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I couldn't go beyond what the Lord my God has said. But he really doesn't mean it. Stay here again tonight while I ask him what I should do. He plays games with God. He's got flowery words on the outside, but not much on the inside. We'll skip down to verse 20 with me. And God said to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men come to call you, rise and go with them, but only the word which I speak to you, that you shall do. More important, we've talked about Balaam knowing God. More important than Balaam knowing about God is that God knows Balaam. God knows everything about Balaam. God knows that Balaam is going to do what Balaam's going to do. He's going to disobey. And even though he might dress it up and make it look real spiritual while doing it, he's going to disobey. So, God allows Balaam to go to Balak, but under no circumstances, God says, will he allow his people to be cursed. Well, the next morning, Balaam saddles his donkey. He sets out with Balak's procession to curse the Jews, but 3 different times, this donkey makes a detour. The angel of the Lord, quite possibly a Christophany for all of the Bible scholars out there, Jesus himself in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord is standing in their path, sword drawn, about to kill Balaam, and Balaam doesn't even see it. Only the donkey sees it. And she is trying to get away from it. I can just see the hugely noble procession traveling in style, servants marching, swords gleaming in the sunlight, royal animals galore, all making up this king's caravan. And way in the back is Balaam on this crazy donkey, running off the path, crushing him up against the wall, and finally just laying over on top of him. Balaam is embarrassed, he is ticked, and he was wanting to ride in style, but instead he's made to look like the dummy that he is. Each time this donkey detours, Balaam gets off and beats her mercilessly until finally God does something astounding in verse 28. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" Now, look, guys, Balaam must be out of his mind angry at this donkey because he doesn't even take a breath. He's not even shocked that the donkey talks. He has a conversation with the donkey. The donkey asks the question, "Well, this is why I'm doing it," verse 29. And Balaam said to the donkey, "Because you've abused me. I wish there were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you." So the donkey goes on, asks him that question, "Am I not your donkey? Have I ever done this to you before?" And he says, "No, you haven't." This heartwarming moment between man and beast. You've never done me wrong, whatever the donkey's name was. And then, verse 31, the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and Balaam bowed his head and fell flat on his face. Well, Balaam offers up some kind of confession to the angel of the Lord, but if you follow the rest of Balaam's life, you know it's not genuine at all. Skip down with me, verse 34. And Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, "I have sinned, for I did not know you stood in the way against me. Now, therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back." Look, Balaam, God has told you twice already, don't do this. "I didn't know you were against me, God. If you want me to, I'll turn back." All fake words, feigning obedience. But really, Balaam is happy to go because he knows the enormous payday that's about to happen. Verse 35, the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, "Go with the men, but only the word that I speak to you, that you shall speak." So Balaam went with the princes of Balak, I think, still deceived, thinking that he's going to curse the people of God and get some money for doing it. Balaam finally gets to Moab and nervously standing before King Balak, beaten and bruised by his donkey's detours, exhausted by his travels, and probably still a little terrified because his donkey just spoke to him and the angel of the Lord was standing with a sword in his hand. We see a little foreshadowing going on when Balaam says to King Balak in verse 38, "Look, I've come to you. Now, have I any power at all to say anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that I must speak." Basically, what Balaam says is, "Balak, I'm here. Don't expect much, though." Don't think Balaam is a willing servant of God. Don't be fooled. Think of him as someone who's at his wit's end, who knows his humanity and knows that God is all-powerful. But still, Balaam wants to play games with God. He's still going through this whole gambit of feigning obedience to him. So standing on a mountain, looking down on the children of Israel encamped in the valley below, Balaam tells King Balak, "Build 7 altars and bring him 7 bulls and 7 rams." So King Balak does it, and they sacrifice them all on the altars. Balaam climbs up to the highest point of the mountain to talk with God, and he tries to impress him by saying in chapter 23, verse 4, "And God met Balaam and said to him, I have prepared the 7 altars, and I have offered on each altar a bull and a ram." Aren't you impressed, God? I've done all this for your glory. I have sacrificed so much for you. But what Balaam meant to do, what he meant by impressing God, it came off really as it was. It was a bribe. He was trying to bribe the King of glory into cursing his people. I don't think God's going to listen to a bribe, even though Balaam would. But God meets with Balaam there, and he gives him words to pronounce over Israel. So Balaam climbs back down to where King Balak and his entourage are, and he begins his oracle, his prophecy, what is meant to be a curse against Israel. I think, again, Balaam fully intended to curse Israel at this moment, but as he spoke, God inserted only blessings for Israel. I mean, he is trying to say curses and only blessings come out. Verse 11 of chapter 23 in Numbers tells us a little bit more. King Balak says to Balaam, "What have you done to me?" After saying all these blessings, "I took you to curse my enemies, and look, you've blessed them. bountifully. King Balak takes Balaam to 2 more locations. They do the whole thing again. 7 altars, 7 rams, 7 bulls. Each time, 3 more times, Balaam's going to speak. Sometimes Balaam climbs up a mountain. Others, he just stands there, right there, knowing what God's going to tell him. And at one point, King Balak says in verse 25 of Numbers chapter 23, he says to Balaam, "Neither curse them at all, nor bless them at all, Balaam. Just stop. Shut up. Don't say anything more. You're trying to do these curses. It's not turning out well, Balaam." It's too late, though. The floodgates of God's blessings, they have already been opened, and you know God's going to bless his people even more. Finally, verse 10 of Numbers chapter 23. Then King Balak's anger was aroused against Balaam, and he struck his hands together. Have you ever had an argument with somebody who they got so ticked off at you that they just start kind of punctuating every single word with clap? Well, that's what Balak is doing here. He says, "Here, Balak, I called you to curse my enemies, and look, here, you have bountifully blessed them 3 times. I mean, that's what's going on. And verse 11, Balaam, he says, "Now therefore I could insert my Balaam, you had better flee to your place. I said I would greatly honor you, Balaam, but in fact the Lord has kept you back from honor." What a sham this is. Both these guys are saying they're doing the work of the Lord and cursing the people of God. None of them, not one of them, are serving the Lord at all. But he says, you better run home, Balaam, because judgment's about to come. King Balak, the full wrath of King Balak is about to come down on you. But instead of fleeing to his place, Balaam, maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of fear, but honestly, I think more out of God gluing him there until he was finished with this cheap prophet, Balaam speaks his 4th and final blessing over Israel. And it's the whole point of the story. It is this prophecy, the oldest specific prophecy that we have of Jesus' birth in Scripture. In this story, God uses an evil king, a greedy prophet, and a talking donkey to relay to the nations 14 centuries before Christ's birth in Bethlehem. Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. Balak wants him to shut up, but Balaam's going to keep on talking. And he says in his prophecy, "I see him," capital H, him, "but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel and batter the brow of Moab and destroy all the sons of tumult." This prophet, greedy and disobedient, speaks a prophecy first of the star that shall come up out of Jacob. That's right. You could flip over to Matthew and you could see that star rise when Jesus is born. And the 3 magi, or the magi, they follow it all the way to where Jesus is with his mother and his father. That star prophesied centuries beforehand. But he also prophesies that a king shall rise. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. At that point in Israel's history, they were just a clan meandering in the wilderness. But Balaam looked over them and he said, there's going to be a king that's going to rise. It didn't make much sense to he or King Balak at that time. And it really didn't even make much sense to probably Joseph and Mary as their child is being born in a stable. This scepter, this king with scepter in hand who will batter the brow of Moab and destroy all the sons of tumult. Didn't make much sense, but he is a king nonetheless. But that's third, the prophecy that he gives him, where it says that he would batter the brow of Moab and destroy all the sons of tumult. What Balaam does, unbeknownst to himself, is he affirms what Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 says. when God curses the serpent and he tells him that you may bruise the seeds, or Adam and Eve's son's seed, Jesus, you may bruise his heel, but he is going to utterly crush your skull, Satan. That's exactly what Balaam says, that a scepter will rise out of Israel and batter the brow of Moab and destroy the sons of Tumult. All those who are against him, he will conquer. Jesus is going to step on the snake, ultimately. Be ready. Now, all this week, I've battled with this text. I don't know why, but for 2 weeks, God has been directing me towards Numbers 22. I've never preached a sermon out of Numbers. I've kept telling myself that it's just a Bible story. It's just, given to us for a historical account. There might be a few morals that we can glean from Balaam's fake prayers and his disobedience. There's really nothing more to this text. What can I challenge our congregation with this morning? That's what I want to do. Every sermon, I want to challenge you. I don't want to just lecture you on the Bible. If I ever start doing that, please dismiss me. That's not what a pastor is supposed to do. I struggled with it all week, almost totally scrapping the whole sermon at the last minute and starting again with another text. But I kept coming back to it. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab and destroy all the sons of tumult. What can I challenge you with this morning? This thought. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. That is what Christmas is all about. Do not think for a second that the story of a child in a manger is just cute and clean and fun for little eyes to see. This is the King of glory coming to redeem sinners. Paul says, of whom I am chief. I think he's wrong. I think I am. That's the whole point of this. But Jesus proclaimed his coming at the dawn of time. And quite often throughout the millennia, through faithful men and women's prophecies, nothing stopped him from coming. Not a piece of fruit eaten treasonously by Adam and Eve. Not an Egyptian Pharaoh who forgot him. Not an unfaithful nation that often railed against him. Not a census, not a holocaust of boys born around his same time. Nothing stopped him from entering into this world to walk up Calvary to redeem your soul. Not one thing stopped him. Not your ignorance, not your disobedience, nor your unwillingness stopped this king. He came. His coming to earth in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, it wasn't by chance, nor was his death on the cross an accident. It was meticulously planned out. It was prophesied of and accomplished according to God's will. Jesus dying on the cross, I've heard it said so many times before, and I've said it so many times from this pulpit. Jesus dying on the cross was not plan B. It was not God scraping together, oh no, they've sinned, what can I do now? It was Jesus Christ slain before the foundation of the world. It was plan A. It was what God intended, although I can't even comprehend it. It was prophesied of and it was accomplished by his meticulous detail, his will. I don't want you to miss the message of Christmas. This first Sunday of December, as we get into all of it, all of the busyness that this season of the year brings, boil it all down to Jesus came for you. Jesus died for you. And Jesus, for every child of God, is returning for you. Accept him into your heart. Make him the King of glory and not just a child in a manger this Christmas.